1. Blog Talk Radio.
Show, Christian political talk show. This is episode 800, folks. Oh my. Today's date is May 16th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we are a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. We do have the chat room opened up in Blog Talk Radio, and we also have the chat room opened up over at YouTube. So I stay on the YouTube one mostly, but I do go back and forth. You'll see me going back and forth between the two channels here as I'm looking at my screens and stuff like that. So everything's working good this morning. I just got to check my live stream over here just to make sure it's actually coming through. And there's my handsome mug there on YouTube. So we are live streaming at YouTube right now. Yesterday afternoon, just around the time I was doing the show, so I didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, the Washington Post was, again, fabricating a story and putting it out as news and as predictable. I mean, if anything, the anti-freedom progressives in this country are, if they're not anything else, they are predictable. The lamestream media and the progressive blogosphere, newssphere on the internet blew up with this story about Trump was leaking top secret information to the Russians. And so we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to actually go over the article a little bit. And the link will be up on the show notes on the page later today or right after the show. I do apologize for yesterday's show notes. I did not get them posted yet. They'll be finished up right after the show also. I had a long day yesterday with being at the doctor all morning into the early afternoon, and by the time I got done with the show, I was done. I had no more energy left, and this is one of those side effects of fibromyalgia where you don't have a lot of energy to get you through the whole day. And that's why I like doing the show earlier in the day, like at noontime. Gives me time to get up, get things around, do some more research. I do a lot of research on articles, reading articles in my recliner while I'm relaxing in the evening. And then what I do is I send the links to myself in an email so I can just open them up here, put them in a Word document, or in this case, a writer document, an open source Office writer document, and then save it into my show notes so I can have it for later, and I can also search that if I want to go back over a subject that I've already went over and get the notes and bring the show notes up and everything. So we're doing that. Just a couple more things, and so I like to share my technical updates with folks, what we're doing here at the show. Right now, I'm testing out a program called DroidCam that'll turn my smartphone into a webcam. I just want to see how that works before I purchase another webcam. and how it works with another program so I can start doing Skype interviews. And if that works out and it works good, I'm looking for, and I haven't done a lot of research on it yet, but I had in my mind that someone has to have a dual webcam mount to put on a single tripod out there. Someone has to have that out there somewhere. If not, maybe I'll invent it and sell it and make millions of dollars. Who knows? But someone has to, I'm pretty sure someone has to have that out there. I did get a second tripod for the studio, and I'm probably going to get the one tripod I'm using now with my Logitech C920 webcam that you're actually seeing me on now is my wife's for her camera, and I promised to give that back to her. And we paid a little bit more for that stand, and it's not as good as the stand I just bought for like $13, a tripod with these. It's a wonderful tripod. So I'm slowly getting the studio set up where I'm going to have a second webcam on me, and then I'm going to have a third webcam set up at my other mic and headphone station to the right of me here. I might possibly, I don't know yet, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. He's got to decide whether he wants to have a live interview on the show or not. But we're actually having a preacher who came from the Middle East and is a New Testament Christian and is preaching and converting other Muslims to Christianity. But you know how touchy that is even here in the United States, and how much trouble someone can get in over that as far as, threats to their life and that. So I got to let him make that decision. I won't even tell you who he is, but I'm trying to set this up. It should be sometime in June. If that happens, what we'll be doing is, I haven't made up my mind yet if we're going to live broadcast this or not. Like I said, I'm going to leave everything entirely up to him. If he wants a video interview, we'll do a video interview. If not, it'll just be an audio interview, and we'll record that and I'll upload it as an extra show on Blog Talk Radio. And also I'll just put the audio over on YouTube. So, but I'm trying to set this up, trying to get set up so I can do Skype calls. I've come a long way on this, everything set up and actually working on getting everything produced and sent out live. I'm not really good at editing, so sometimes my videos on YouTube, I got to get back in there. They have an editing tool, and I just make sure that the front end of my videos are in sync with my radio show over on Blog Talk Radio. So that's important to me. So I just gotta just type good morning. Somebody just came into the chat room on Blog Talk Radio. Now today we're going to be talking about why the lamestream media and the anti-freedom groups out there are often wrong. And this has a lot to do with the fabricated story of the Washington Post that came out yesterday about a meeting with Russia and President Trump and some of his advisors, and the sources that the Washington Post cites and all this other stuff, this brouhaha that came up. And like I said, everybody's been running with this. Okay. There's a couple things I just want to touch on real quickly in the show when we get it started about voter fraud's real, and here's proof. I want to go over that article real quick. It's from John Gibbs over at the Federalist, and I just want to point out some things towards the end of the article. You can go read the article fully for yourself, but he makes some really good points at the end of the article about the narrative on the progressive side of things, on the anti-freedom progressive side of things, about voter fraud, and it's an argument that they have no defense for, because it's a logical argument. Go figure, right? Again, we're going to talk about net neutrality. Tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit more about net neutrality. I won't get into it too much today. I talked about it yesterday, but with the malware attack over the weekend, I don't know what happened. I'm still trying to figure out what happened on my computer. I didn't get attacked by this malware, but my desktop picture, for some reason, is the same as my laptop background picture on the screen, and I never changed it up here. Something happened. Now they're hooked up on the network, and something happened, and it synced up both computers. And for some reason, and I don't mind having the background that I actually have here on my computer, and I'll show that to you real quick. Like I said, I like this. This is something that I actually set up. You know, I found this picture. I really like this picture of Jeff Gordon's car, and huge fan of Jeff Gordon when he was racing. I'm watching and keeping an eye on Chase Elliott. I made him my NASCAR driver, so we'll see what happens there. I've always, when Richard Petty retired, I looked around, found Danny Angaius. He only stayed in NASCAR a year or two, and then he went off Baja or something like that. And then I was looking around again, and I seen this Jeff Gordon coming up through the ranks. I heard the name before, and sure enough, my stepdad, who's huge into sprint cars and outlaw sprint cars, he knew who Jeff Gordon was because that's where he got his start, along with Tony Stewart. And so he looked like he was tearing up the track, so I said, he's going to be my boy, and he was for many years until he retired. And so now I like Chase Elliott. I like him. I like his aggressive style. So, and he also runs in the truck. I'm not sure if he runs in the Nationwide, but he does run in the truck and series. So he does a lot of racing, and I think you're going to see some good things from Chase Elliott. So, but this picture was on my laptop. I had the Reagan picture on my desktop up here, the Reagan in front of the flag. So I was kind of mad when that happened, because I don't know why it happened. I'm still trying to figure out why that happened. I scrubbed both systems with malware. I did find some malware on this computer up here and my laptop downstairs. So I don't know why. Honestly, I don't know why there are hackers out there. I don't know why they have to mess around with computer systems, especially this ransomware. I actually looked at, I have Linux Mint running on my streaming computer, and it's real lightweight and works fantastic. And I know that Linux is more secure than Windows, because if you go in and change, and this is the secret, one of the secrets about Linux, if you go in and add programs and change programs, it makes that distribution that you have on your computer unique. And I'm not saying that they can't exploit any security breaches on Linux through updates and stuff like that, but it's highly unlikely because of the uniqueness of Linux. Now, if Linux ever took over the market, then you might see hacks and viruses and malware that was designed for open source systems. And but as long as you're not running, and this is just a free tidbit because of this malware thing, if you're running Linux on your computer, one of the fastest ways to get infected, if you're also running Wine, because you want to run some Windows programs, because not all the Windows programs out there will work on an open source Linux system. Now, what I've been doing on my Microsoft is any extra things I put on there, like my audio player for my songs and everything, that's an open source. They actually have a Linux distribution, which makes it open source. Just about everything that you can do on Windows, you can actually do over on Linux. This broadcast, what I'm doing here, I'm using Open Broadcast Suite, and I do have XSplit, and XSplit is very, very good. I wish I could use it, but the only way I could use it is if I put it on a computer, and that's all it did. That's all the computer did, and even then, I'm told it's such a resource hog that you'd have to have a very, like an i7 or better CPU with a huge GPU, graphics processor on it, in order to it to run so it doesn't hog up all the system resources. And I don't know if they're working on a way to minimize that or not. I know the guys and gals over at Open Broadcast Studio, it's an open source, they're working on this. They're actually, the more donations they get in, the more they can work on this. They're going to add like a video feature where you can actually play videos in the broadcaster Right now, the best way to do it, I put them into broadcaster, but setting up the audio sometimes doesn't work, and I don't know why. So what I do is I go to desktop, like I just showed you, and I have the video opened up on my one screen, my main screen sitting in front of me, and that's how I show that. Just a little technical for folks out there that might be interested in doing this. Anyway, so we're going to be, getting off that because I was talking about the malware attacks. We're going to talk about that tomorrow with a little bit more about the net neutrality tomorrow. I do want to get into that, but I think this Washington Post story actually needs to take precedence. It really does, and I do want to finish up with the voter fraud. So, with having said all that, I just want to introduce you, if you don't know about it, Rocky Mountain High Brands. It's the official drink of the Dan Clements Show. They have 4 flavors right now, plus energy shots, plus they have protein bars, energy bars, plus they have a water, Eagle Water, I believe it's called, Eagle Spirit Water it is, I guess. This is a growing company right now. I do own stock in it as far as, full disclosure. They are a penny stock right now, but we're hoping that they go the way of other energy drinks and other drinks in the market. When they started out new, like Monster Energy, started out as a penny stock, and it's trading, up around anywhere from $80 to $100, depending on what day of the week it is. So I like this. I like the iced tea. I like the lemon lime, and I like the lemonade. The other two, the energy, the extra caffeine in it, it's a little too much for me. Although I like the flavors, I hope that maybe someday they might bring those out in just a regular drink that isn't an energy drink, which would be great because one's citrus and one's mango, and they're both got really good flavors. So I just want to share that with you. That is the official drink of the Dan Clements Show, and right now the only place on the East Coast you can get it. Up in my area, the woods anyway, is if you go on Amazon and actually order that. I did order a variety pack and have gone through that already. I have iced tea on the way. I like the iced tea, and then like every other payday, we're going to buy a case of it and just have it sent to the house because the hemp oil that's infused in it, that's why it's called Rocky Mountain High Brand. It has 100 milligrams of hemp oil in it, and the hemp oil actually seems to help my pain and so I can work later into the day without feeling the effects of that. Today's daily Bible reading comes from the book of Matthew. Seems like we're in the book of Matthew this week. Chapter 26, verses 31 through 33. Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. As it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I've been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." But Peter answered and said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble." And this was on the Mount of Olives. This was the night in which Jesus was betrayed by Judas Iscariot. So, this is a very important event in Christianity where Jesus is going to his death. Because that's what the gospel is, the good news. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the first couple verses, the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Today's quote meal comes from John Bunyan. I like that name, Bunyan. In prayer, it is better to have a heart without words than words without a heart. Think about that for a little bit. And today's daily Bible lesson, you'll find a link to it in the show notes page. It's by Ben Gesselbach of plainsimplefaith.com. This was posted June 11th of 2014, but still relevant today. Are your study habits killing the church? And I've shared this on Facebook a lot of times. Instead of having man caves, we need to get back to having studies. An actual study where books and reading and learning can go on instead of sitting in your man cave and being entertained. And quite honestly, folks, that's where the secular world wants you. That's where politicians want you. That's where progressives and anti-freedom folks want men. They want them in these man caves, so they're not paying attention to what's going on outside of them. So if they can keep them entertained with circus, well, it sounds like a Roman type thing, doesn't it? If they can keep entertained with circus and keep them fed, they won't be able, they won't have a clue what's going on around them. And that's a huge problem today. This is one of the biggest problems we have today. And this is one of the things we're going to be talking about in the show here. In the news stories, it's all about the source of the news story and if they can be confirmed and are credible. And this is what we're going to get into when we get in the Washington Post article. And this is the problem we're having today. Too many people have a narrative, like with this voter fraud. Too many people have a narrative that they already have in their minds. And it's very hard. It really is. It's very hard to get to get not. I don't want to say knock, but to be able to sit down and reason with somebody and actually get them to rethink the narrative that they're following. And quite frankly, folks, it's very dangerous to follow a narrative, because when you're following the narrative instead of following the truth and the facts, you are falling into the trap of modern day critical thinking and the critical thinking theory of modern day. What happens with that, if you haven't listened to the show very long, what happens with the critical thinking theory today, or critical theory it's called today, is you have a conclusion that you've already made up. You go into a situation with a conclusion. Then you start looking for facts. And it doesn't have to even be facts, but you start looking for things to support that conclusion or that narrative. And sometimes they can be facts taken out of context. Sometimes they are cherry-picked, and that's how they're taken out of context. Or they just ignore the facts altogether, and they go by suppositions. They go by what I talk about, and I always make up, write up a little tag, a little couple paragraphs about the show of the day. And it seems today folks aren't concerned with how other folks view them. Some folks today don't care if the news sources they follow are trustworthy, as long as the news source gives them information that supports the narrative they've come to believe as the truth. And that's how come it's so hard to get people to reevaluate who they are, what they are. And folks, Paul told the Romans, I'm sorry about this. I want to get the exact wording. I'd just be paraphrasing this if I didn't get the exact wording of this to you. And just open up my eSword. I have to close down everything that I'm not using because of the performance of the computer with everything I'm doing here. But in Romans chapter 12, he said, Paul told them in verse 1, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So even God wants us not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That means the renewing of your mind actually means that you're going to look at things and make sure that what you're being told is actually the truth. I've said this many a time when I've preached in the pulpit, that do not trust what I'm telling you. Go and verify it for yourself. And I'm not the only preacher I've ever heard that. It's not original to me, but I think it's a good thing every now and then for if you're preaching in the pulpit or even listening to me on this YouTube video. Do not take what I tell you as gospel, because guess what? I'm human and I can make mistakes. Or maybe I'm not looking at something the way I need to be looking at it. Maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. And maybe it needs to be pointed out to me. And I welcome constructive criticism. I welcome my views to be challenged. I welcome anything that I share in the show to be challenged. And that's a good thing, because we need to keep our minds renewed. We really do. And the narratives that we hear out there every day, and just a real quick example, I've been talking with folks on Facebook, Indivisible Group. They're targeting the replacement of Dodd-Frank. And the sky's falling, the world's going to come to an end if we get rid of Dodd-Frank. All these predatory lenders and everything out there that just preyed on these poor people that had to foreclose on their homes. I'm like, wait a minute. And I challenged their narrative, and I've been challenged back. But the challenges I'm getting back are still about their narrative. It's not about facts. I said there was a lot of greedy people out there, as far as I'm concerned, who took those subprime loans and didn't think about the consequences of the future. They just looked so attractive to them, but when you put the pencil to paper, and this happened to Lori and I, when we got the loan for this house back in the early 2000s, this was before the housing bubble and everything. We went, sat down at the bank, and I asked my wife if she remembered those conversations. She goes, yeah, I remember you saying that you didn't want some type of loan. She doesn't understand what the loan was. And that's exactly what the loan officer offered us. They offered us a subprime mortgage. Our payments would be, and I don't care if anybody knows how much I pay in monthly mortgage, and this was with my taxes and my insurance included. And my insurance is higher than most people's because I have replacement cost insurance on my house. And my taxes right now run about $800 a year in this area. So my actual monthly payments are a little over $500. I pay $600 a month so we can pay off the loan earlier, but it's like $533 or something like that a month. Under her plan, with taxes and insurance and everything, originally, if I remember my math right, my payments would have been like $350 or between $350 and $400, somewhere in that neighborhood, and we just saved a few $100s a month. But at the end of 7 years, either I could pick a couple options. One, it'd be a balloon payment. I'd have to refinance the house. And then, and thank God we didn't do that, because at the time, we almost lost the house as it was due to a medical. I had my neck operated on, was without a job for a better part of a year. And we needed some help. The state, Pennsylvania, had some help, which we've actually paid back that help since then. To help us keep our home, because they just have this program at the state level. But anyway, I told the lady, I remember telling the lady there at the loan office, I said, what kind of fool would take this type of loan? My exact words. I remember them. What kind of fool would take these loans? Boy, you ought to hear the firestorm that created with a couple people over there. Well, you're just one of the lucky ones, Dan. You got yours, so the heck with everybody else. I'm like, well, luck didn't have nothing to do with it, folks. And I was accused of being, well, you're just smarter than everybody else. Good for you. And I said, I'm not smarter than everybody else. I have some common sense that my dad beat into my brain sometimes. That I look at a situation, if it looks too good to be true, you better investigate it. And this is exactly what happened with the subprime. Now, was there some bankers that took advantage of people and talked them into because they were too gullible? Yes, there was. But I don't believe that was the vast majority of them. I believe the vast majority of them, if you look at the houses that were being bought and foreclosed on, these were some very nice houses in very affluent neighborhoods, some of them brand new, and the people had good jobs. But when it come time, because of the financial collapse, to refinance them, the houses were upside down. They owed more on the house than what it was worth at market value, and that's what happens. And they gambled on the future and they lost. Boo-hoo-hoo's us. We gambled on the future, lost, now we need help. It's like, what? And like I said, I'm not a financial genius. If I was, I'd be better off than what I am now. But even I could see that was not a good situation to get yourself into. So I don't even like adjustable rate mortgages. I want to know exactly what my payment is every month, and so I got a fixed rate, so a couple points higher than the average than the fixed rates or the adjustable rates at the time. But guess what? Yeah, I might still be paying more. I could refinance and get a little less money. Pay a little bit less money each month. But I always know what my payment's going to be. It's not going to go up. It's not going to go down unless I refinance. So I have a fixed interest loan, which is what I wanted. And trust me when I tell you, I bet you $1 a dozen donuts, almost everybody who got foreclosed on with the subprime loans, I bet you they wish to God that they had a fixed rate mortgage. They didn't have that balloon payment that was still within their grasp of actually making payments on. But that was the problem. There was a lot of greed going around. It just wasn't with the banks. But the progressive anti-freedom groups out there blame the banks for everything. And they don't blame the individual. And folks, in my opinion, there's enough blame to go around. And I think it was more so on the individual was the banks. The banks were offering these. This is one of the ways, it was one of the instruments that they had that you could borrow money on. And it was like, a lot of people looked at it and they did not do the math. They were betting on the future, and I'm just not going to do that. especially with an investment like a home. I'm not going to bet on that. People who were flipping houses at the time were getting these subprime mortgages, and some of the bigger ones in the country went belly up. These home flippers that did a lot of flipping, they literally went belly up because they couldn't sell the homes. They were upside down loans that they had on the homes, and they just literally went bankrupt because they were betting on the housing market to never go down. And I don't care who you are, that's just not going to happen. It's always going to go down. And the same way with voter fraud, folks. This is the same narrative. There's a narrative being put out there by the anti-freedom progressives in the Democrat Party and elsewhere that, well, we only had a handful of prosecutions over the last 10 years. Like, I think it was like 1,000 prosecutions over the last 10 years. There's no voter fraud going on out there. It's not being prosecuted. And that's the narrative. And people buy into that. Well, that sounds reasonable to me. Yes, it does sound reasonable, doesn't it? You know, that we only have a handful of prosecutions over the past 10 years, so it must not be any voter fraud going on. And like I said yesterday, we're talking about the Veritas Project that has videotaped evidence of Acorn folks going out and just fraudulently filling out voter registrations to turn in because they were being paid for that. And they were making some good money doing that. We have evidence that voter fraud was going on. But no, they're hoping you forget that kind of stuff. Well, that's why you got me around here and other guys like me and gals like me that, you know, don't forget our recent history, that these things go on. Let me get down here to where I was. Towards the end of the article, how to effectively target voter fraud is at the end of the article. I wanted to get up here. Maybe I need to go to the second part. Don't let the data contradict the narrative. Okay, this is where I really wanted to be at this real quick. Yet in spite of all this, a report by the Brennan Center at New York University claims voter fraud is a myth. They argue that North Carolina, which passed comprehensive measures to prevent voter fraud, failed to identify even a single individual who has ever been charged with committing in-person voter fraud in North Carolina. And they also, in that same court case, the prosecutor, or, you know, the ones that brought the case were not able to find a single person that wasn't able to get an ID if they wanted one. Same case, okay? And we talked about this at length yesterday. However, this faulty reasoning does not point to the lack of in-person voter fraud, but rather to the lack of enforcement mechanisms to identify and prosecute in-person voter fraud. The science of criminal justice tells us that many crimes go unreported, and the more victimless the crime, the more this happens. The fact is, a person attempting to commit voter fraud is very unlikely to be caught, which increases the incentive to commit the crime. The National Crime Victimization Survey, the NCVS, is a sophisticated, comprehensive effort to catalog the number and types of crimes not reported to law enforcement authorities. However, it tends to deal mostly with violent crimes. As complex as the NCVS is, gathering accurate data for unreported victimless crimes, such as voter fraud, is even harder since, one, outside of the criminal, no one may know a crime has taken place. And two, there's no direct victim to report the crime in the first place. Yet we are expected to believe that unlike violent crime, voter fraud is limited only to the cases that are actually reported and prosecuted. This is a senseless position, okay? Further, the Brennan Center report argues that because prosecutor Chris Kobach's review of 84 million votes cast in 22 states found only 14 instances of fraud referred to prosecution, which amounts to a point. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 7. There's 6 zeros before the 17% fraud rate. Voter fraud is so statistically small that it's a non-issue. Well, let's follow this logic. Does the fact that 109 people were cited for jaywalking in Seattle in 2009 mean that only 109 people jaywalked in Seattle that year? Good question. Does the fact that 103,733 people were cited for driving without a seatbelt in Tennessee in 2015 mean that only that many people were driving without seatbelts in Tennessee in 2015? Reasonable question. Okay? Absolutely not. This can be proven easily because in 2014, the previous year, only 29,470 people were cited. The disparity is largely due to increased enforcement efforts in 2015. In other words, increasing enforcement to the crime revealed as much larger numbers of people committing the crime. The exact same is true for voter fraud. We have no reason to believe that the low numbers of prosecutions means only that exact amount of voter fraud is happening. Rather, it could mean a lack of enforcement is failing to reveal the bulk of the violations that are occurring. Thus, as with many types of crimes, especially victimless crimes, the real number of cases is likely significantly higher than the number reported. Okay? And the one idea I had, and you can tell me I'm way off base with this or not, I think the one thing that would actually stop voter fraud is if you would put a peace officer, sheriff, deputy sheriff, a local, a LEO, local law enforcement officer, whatever, okay? If you put one of those per voting precinct and just have them inside, they're not doing anything but have them inside, but have signs there that voter fraud will be, and give them a citation to show up in court. I don't think you have to arrest anybody, but if someone comes in and has an in-person, fraudulent vote, and this is where voter ID would come in and help this greatly, that they need to be cited and they need to show up to court and defend themselves against that. I think that would stop a lot of it, but like I said, maybe I'm way off base with that. That's just, I'm spitballing here. I don't know. And but they go on to say in the article here how to effectively target voter fraud. So now that we know voter fraud is a serious issue, what are some solutions to the problem? States like Michigan have poll challenge programs where observers from both parties may be present at voter check-in tables at precincts. They check each voter's ID against a database of registered voters for that precinct to ensure the person attempting to vote is actually legally qualified to vote in that precinct. If there's a discrepancy, the poll challenger may officially challenge the ballot. Other states should implement similar programs. States should sponsor initiatives to remove dead voters and correct the registrations of people registered in multiple states. Make them choose one state. Since my local jurisdictions are reluctant to clean their voter rolls, federal and state oversight with teeth may be necessary. And I agree with this. Why in the world can't we clean up our voter rolls? What is so bad about that? And I have yet to have an anti-freedom progressive tell me what's wrong with that. Logically. Well, we might catch somebody that is and is not. Look, folks, it's real easy in the precincts to go to the courthouse and find out somebody's dead because death certificates have to be recorded. Okay? If someone shows up to vote in the precinct and they have an out-of-state license, they're not eligible to vote there, even though they might have had an address, or in some cases I've read in the past, people still own property in that precinct. So they come back and they try to vote in that precinct because they still own property there, even though they don't live there. They live in another state and they're actually registered in that other state. Voter ID laws, such as the one implemented by North Carolina, struck down by 3 liberal judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, one appointed by Bill Clinton and the other 2 appointed by President Obama, are needed to ensure there's no cheating with votes. States should continue to press the issue regardless of recent setbacks by liberal activist judges. Finally, some have claimed that strong voter ID laws are racist because they disproportionately impact minorities and would prevent minorities from voting. As a black person, and this is the author of this article, I didn't give it earlier because I wanted to wait till I got down there. His name's John Gibbs. He's writing for The Federalist. Okay, thefederalist.com. He says, as a black person, I am naturally interested in this claim. Thankfully, it turns out to be false. The Heritage Foundation has shown that black voters' turnout actually increased after North Carolina passed its voter ID law. And that's the same thing that happened in Indiana. It's like, but I thought it was supposed to depress the vote, not increase it. And I bet you, I didn't read the arguments at this court case, but I bet you this was entered in evidence, and these liberal judges, activist judges, just disregarded it altogether. What the Heritage Foundation found out about the increased voting of black people in North Carolina. Not only was the claim negative about outcome false, but the reasoning was faulty as well. The fact that the law disproportionately impacts minorities does not mean it is discriminatory. It means, unfortunately, that fewer minorities are in compliance with common sense safeguards to protect the integrity of our elections. Having a driver's license or photo ID. To mitigate this concern, states can offer a service that will take people without valid ID to their local government office and apply for proper ID, free of charge. Users could schedule the pickup with their smartphone or a phone call. That way there would be a few barriers as possible to those who want to vote and are capable of obtaining a valid ID. But cannot, due to transportation concerns, a reason often given by those who claim voter ID laws hurt minorities. Now, I've said it before, my precinct here, which is small, but even I'll even extend it out to our district, even though it covers a big area, I would be willing to do it myself or find someone to help you do that. And yet, that's a common sense solution, and they just will not. The anti-freedom crowd out there, the lamestream media, are on this narrative that voter ID laws hurt minorities, and too many people out there believe that narrative without actually going and investigating if that is true or not. Okay, let's get on to this WASPO. This is, folks, this is fascinating to me. It really is fascinating to me how these people actually operate. And it just, I have a Fox News with Robert Schmidt and Heather Childers, a report about this, and this was posted up just a couple hours ago today. And I'm going to show this to you, and let me know what you think of this. Let me know what you think about this video, because, folks, this is something that's important for our republic. This is something that we need to understand. We need to understand for our republic on securing the vote and actually truing the vote. So give this a listen.
Lambasting a Washington Post report that President Trump leaked classified information to the Russians.
Yes, the storyline sending Democrats and the mainstream media into full attack mode. Let's get right to Griff Jenkins for some new reaction from overnight. Good morning, Griff.
Good morning, Heather and Rob. That's right. The White House vehemently denying a Washington Post report that the president revealed classified information last week. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster telling reporters in the White House lawn last night it simply didn't happen.
At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room.
There are signs up in the intelligence rooms up there. It says, loose lips can sink ships. It's these, shall we say, accidental, I don't know what word to describe for the president, and this messy approach to intelligence that is very endangering.
Now, two other administration officials who were present in that meeting, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Deputy National Security Advisor Diana Powell, issued statements rejecting the claims. And now this isn't a legal question of whether the president broke any laws, as the president has broad authority to classify information, but it raises the question, guys, who is leaking all of this information? I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about it all day long today.
Yeah, it's a big day for that. All right, Griff, thanks so much.
All right, folks, you heard that, and Nancy Pelosi, man, oh man. Nancy Pelosi, I'm telling you, loose ships can sink ships. Loose lips can sink ships, I'm told. I'm just told this. Folks, if you go back, and I have the article, I'm not going to read it to you, but I have the link to the article, the Washington Post article. It was posted on the 15th by Greg Miller and Greg Jaffe. Trump revealed highly classified information to Russian foreign ministers and ambassador. Now, there was only 4 people in that meeting with the foreign minister and ambassador and Donald Trump. There was only 4: McMaster's, Tillerson, the young lady there, and then Donald Trump. Anybody else is cited in this story, and I read through the story a couple times to see if I was missing something, see if I was missing a link somewhere. Some of these folks that the Washington Post are using as sources are former intelligence. Okay, they're not saying if they were in the White House or not. Some I think they actually did say some might have been in the White House, but they weren't in that meeting. And some of them may still be in the White House in what we call the deep state on this program. Not my term. It's not original to me, but it's applicable, and it's actually descriptive of what's going on in the White House. And I'm just going to say the White House right now, the deep state that's operating in the White House. No way to confirm these sources, none whatsoever to confirm these sources. We can, and I don't think we need to, but McMaster said that there was only certain people, Tillerson and other folks in that, and that was it. That was it, folks. And to run a story like the Washington Post did now, the Washington Post is no better than the New York Times, no better than Slate, Salon, any of these other very anti-freedom, progressive, part of the lamestream media. When it comes to fake news, CNN, that clip, if you watched the clip, it was Nancy Pelosi on CNN. And honestly, folks, anybody that still trusts that woman honestly needs their head examined. They have something mentally wrong with them if they believe what comes out of that woman's mouth. And anybody who still takes CNN as a serious news channel needs their head examined too. Because they have proven time and time again they are the king of fake and fabricated news. And I believe the Washington Post, and some people, the first time I heard it, Mark Levin coined the phrase the Washington Compost. First time I heard it. Maybe it wasn't original to him, but that's where I got it from. And they're living up to that adjective, the Washington Compost. Because that paper is good for nothing but compost. Put it in the bottom of your bird's cage until it gets filthy, and then put it out in the compost pile. Let it just compost and put it in the... That's all it's good for. Because time and time again, I've read articles out of the Washington Post where there was a lot of error in the article and a lot of suppositions that are being made, and the narrative that they were crafting was leading people to a wrong conclusion. An absolutely wrong conclusion. And this is a problem. This is a problem, folks. And it's no wonder. It's no wonder people are confused in this country. Look, we all only have 24 hours in a day, and we have to determine for ourselves what's most important and spend time on that. And there are a lot of people out there that absolutely do not have the time in their busy schedules to keep up with all this stuff, like a guy like me or Rush Limbaugh or Mark Levin, that does this, for a living. And I wish mine was for a living. Mine's just for fun right now. Hoping to make it into a living very soon. But that we do this, that we keep up with these things. And so they watch the news. My wife does the same thing. My wife's a very busy woman. She sits down in the morning with her cup of tea, and we'll discuss things. She likes watching NBC News, and I warn her just to make sure that you check the sources on them. And her source is me. She asks me questions about them. I tell them why I read this that contradicts what they're saying. And the source that I'm using, I trust the source because I've actually researched them and they're trustworthy. And so people don't have the time of the day. And I'm not trying to use that as an excuse for folks. That's just a fact. That's just the facts of life. And so they hear something that sounds plausible, sounds truthful. It's from a major publication in the country like the Washington Post. They ought to know what they're talking about. And so they just run with that story. In their mind, it's a true story because they don't have time to check it out. They don't have time to make sure whether it's right or wrong. And, okay, I understand that. I get that. I was that way before, too, when I was driving truck. But when I was driving truck, I actually listened to talk radio and news shows and stuff like that to find out what was going on in the world. I mean, that's just, maybe I'm a geek that way. I don't know. But I was always interested in what was going on in the country. I was always interested in what was going on in our local congregation. I'd go to men's business meetings where I hadn't been to church because of driving. I hadn't been there during the week for weeks. Come back and know exactly what's going on in the congregation, not through gossips or anything, but because I cared and I read the minutes of the men's business meeting and talked with people about different issues and stuff like that I saw that were actually going on. And so I kept informed, and I still keep informed. And whenever I hear, especially, folks, I'm sorry, and I'm not being jaded or anything like this at all. I'm not jaded. I look at the landscape out there, and it's an old military, especially infantry adage, let the terrain dictate your actions. And the terrain I see before me right now is the lamestream media and their sycophants that support them, whether it's, folks on Facebook or these very liberal, anti-freedom progressive groups out there that support the narrative, that don't take the time to step back and look at the whole story and start piecing together what exactly is going on. This narrative sounds good to them, so that's the narrative they're going to run with, and any news story that feeds into that narrative, they're going to believe. And when you challenge them on that narrative, the biggest thing that happens, and I think a lot of times we got to get over ourselves. The biggest thing that happens is we get embarrassed because we feel like we know what's going on, and then when someone comes along and actually proves us wrong, that we really don't know what's going on, that upsets us. That's a big ego deflator, as it were. And so they get very nasty and they get very defensive instead of saying, well, what you're saying isn't what I've heard. Can we sit down and talk about this? That doesn't happen. We don't have honest public discourse now. We don't. We don't have civil and honest. I'll put civil in there also. Public discourse about these things. Can we sit down and talk about this? Can we look at this Washington Post article and dissect it? Can we sit down and look? Well, they're talking about these sources that are never named, that were not in the room when all these discussions were going on, but they're making suppositions about, well, this could have happened in the meeting. This probably happened in the meeting because of my past experience. And a lot of these, their past experience has to be with President Barack Obama. Has to be. Because they haven't been there long enough with Donald Trump yet. So I'm actually thinking about, well, what actually happened during the Obama administration for these supposed in-the-know folks to say what they said about, well, this is what happens in these meetings. And again, they're running with this story. They're running with this story as it's actually factual. If you go to the show notes page after the show, I have a article here by Nick Visser from HuffingtonPost.com. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle fume over Trump leak allegations. Now, some are on my, as far as in my way of thinking on these things, but others, predictably, are on the side of the lamestream media and that narrative that they're crafting with this. On that side of it, thinking, well, it's Donald Trump, of course, like Nancy Pelosi. Do I call it accidental? I mean, this mess of intelligence that he has, this mess he's created with our intelligence agencies. No, it's not a mess that he created. It's something that was handed to him from President Barack Obama that you guys never criticized. The anti-freedom progressive Democrats in Congress and whether it's the House Representative or the Senate never criticized President Barack Obama for these things. And so when they get this, when the Washington Post is handed this information by what they consider to be trustworthy sources, now the newspaper is not going to give up their sources. They're under the shield law. But that doesn't stop me from questioning. You're using sources that cannot be confirmed. They may have been well placed in the Obama administration, but can you factually say they're well placed in the Trump administration, in the deep state that is in the executive offices of the United States of America? Can you say that they are? They're not going to. And so since they cannot give you information to confirm the validity of these officials that are highly placed, that McMaster says weren't even in the room. He said who was in the room, and that was it. And none of the stories that are being told out there in the lamestream media are jiving with what McMaster's is saying actually happened. And so we got this whole news cycle that blew up because of this fabricated story by the Washington Post. So I'm just trying to tell you that you need to be careful of your news sources. The Washington Post cannot be trusted. CNN cannot be trusted. And I'm not talking about everybody in there. The CNN has some good reporters. I've actually cited articles from Washington Post from individual reporters that I trust, that I've actually researched and verified their information, and you know, I keep shaking my head. How in the world did Washington Post let that one out? You know, how in the world did they do that? So it is amazing to me. It is amazing to me how many people just take what the lamestream media says as gospel and runs with it. It really is, because you know what happens, and I wrote this up in my little write-up on this at the end of here. America will have a hard time standing if folks are not willing to challenge what they believe and find out for themselves if something is true or not. Our republic will only survive if we have moral people finding, holding, and sharing the truth. And that is a major problem in the United States of America, in our great republic. Our republic will not stand if we don't push back against these false narratives, if we don't push back against the idea that these purveyor of news that permeate the internet, our televisions, the radio, everything, these purveyor news, if we don't challenge their narrative, if we don't challenge them on their reporting. Quite honestly, this article should have never been posted by the Washington Post. It's fabricated, most of it's fabricated. And the part where McMaster says these are the only people who were in that meeting, nobody else knows about what went on in that meeting or what was said. That's the only truthful part of the article, but yet they downplay that. They downplay that completely. And it amazes me how many people actually eat that up. It really does. And we need to, and again, whether you believe me or not is up to you. When I post these up in the show notes page, if you don't believe me, go look at the sources that I'm citing and see if I'm twisting these things around to fit my point of view. My point of view is liberty and freedom for as many people as possible in this great republic that we call America. And we're not going to get there by lying to each other. We're not going to get there by consuming lies in the news. We're not going to protect and keep this republic healthy and vibrant by allowing people to act immorally in the press. The press is protected from government intrusion by our First Amendment. But with that protection comes responsibility. The press should not be beholden to any political party or political ideology. It's called the news. You report it. You report as many angles of the news as you possibly can report. And this thing about, well, we only had so much time to spend on this, so we made an editorial decision to cut the story down and leave out pertinent facts, so that it looks one way when it really wasn't. All right. If you're that pressed for time and it's an important story, put out a special edition. And if you don't have the space to do it on primetime TV, guess what? Put it on YouTube. Put it on the internet. But get it put out with all the facts. Don't sit there and say, well, it was an editorial decision because of time or length. That is an old-tire argument that does not pertain to today's society. Where a guy like me can go on a live stream on YouTube at the same time I'm simulcasting on Blog Talk Radio, and I'm on a shoestring. Honestly, I don't even have a budget for this show. I'm just on a shoestring trying to get this thing out there and get this done to be able to support my family. And this is the thing I want you to take away from this. We're talking about multi-million, hundreds of millions sometimes, news agencies, newspapers, and whatever they are. question, folks. Question these folks, the purveyors of news, folks. It's been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional lawyer. Remember, aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, folks, and God bless you. We'll see you